Here we go.
But what's going to happen is...
I love this end of the sofa. You can sprawl.
Wiggle his car.
Yeah, wrapped.
It's getting official.
Yeah, it is. It is.
We added that in the last episode, and I was like, oh, okay. All right, cool.
Here's a weird idea. There's a great creative exercise, which is effectively, because we're talking about the theory of constraints, it's worth knowing this, where you have a business and you artificially impose a constraint on yourself to effectively spur creativity. And so the typical idea given is you've got an airline and you have to make money from your airline assets, but the planes aren't allowed to leave the ground. Okay. And one of the ideas I had just writing here was there should be a way to make money for London taxi drivers when they're not moving, which is to rent the space. Okay. If every London taxi just had a small table and you could call down a taxi and say, I basically want your cab for a Zoom call for an hour. I want to work in it. You go off and have a meal, right? I'll pay you a reasonable rate for the rent of your cab as effectively stationary office space. Or actually, if you wanted to snooze.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got to have some rules because there's a problem with Waymo with people having sex in the cars. Which is when you have driverless taxis, it doesn't take long for people suddenly to get quite amorous. So there is a Waymo problem with that, which they have to address. It's a really interesting, there have to be other things you could use taxis for other than just as a mode of transport. Because the big problem in London is if you're out and about in London and you've got a Zoom call at 1 o'clock, you've got to do something dumb like go to a cafe and then order 3 coffees and find a stupid corner, which is generally a pain. And actually every taxi is potentially an office.
And then, have you been in a Waymo before?
Yes, once in Austin.
How'd you find it?
I agree with my colleague who said it's totally chill at speeds of 20, 30, 40 miles an hour. But on the open freeway at 60 or 70, you'd get a bit spooked.
What is it?
So basically, when you go to San Francisco or Austin or LA, it's basically like driverless cars. And you can order it on an app. It's
a Jaguar I-Pace with loads of LiDAR and rotating things on top.
And the funny thing is, it's not like it just like drives like a normal driver. It drives actually like a normal driver. So there's no one there. So basically, you can go to a game and you're drinking alcohol. That's why, and it can basically like measure the weight of the people that are on there. So if you leave something in the car, it'll alert you, etc., etc. But the funny thing about it is, if it's stuck in traffic and he knows there's a quick way to like overtake and go, it does it. You just see the steering wheel like spinning and you're like, where are you going? So I decided to go there after like going to a WNBA game because there was like nobody there and it was insane. But apparently,
which game?
So it was the Golden State, like the Golden State
Warriors.
Yeah. So that was great. But then I really wanted to do this experiment without going to driverless car, but it was actually pretty good. Actually pretty good.
Yeah, it's the sort of thing that I guess the first time you do it feels really weird and you probably get used to it very quickly.
There is a potential thing with driverless cars which I don't think humans will ever cope with. Which is theoretically, you don't need traffic lights because with enough precision, literally cars could crisscross at 70 miles an hour, just judging the gap perfectly, you see. So you can literally get rid of a set of traffic lights and you could have cars rumbling through alternately in different directions, sort of 3 feet apart. And it would hugely increase the efficiency of the road network. The theory is that people would just find it too terrifying, horrible, basically.
And people mess with it. So there's like this whole like Instagram about like Waymo fails, right? Apparently one like went to the high speed road on the opposite side. Then there was another one that because they all go to this like parking lot to park themselves. There's like Waymo on Waymo trying to like beep at each other to like act. So there's little things like that it needs to get better at. But
you can also hack them, which I predicted, which is one of the famous San Francisco ones is that if you put a traffic cone on the bonnet or hood of a Waymo, it basically gets completely confused and can't proceed. So there is a potential risk, which is things like, for example, carjackings, you see, because the thing can't run anybody over, you you could literally, stand in front of get one person to stand in front of a Waymo, demand that the people get out. So there are a whole load of risks where, if you think about it, every car, potentially every motorist, has the threat of, I'm going to drive at your legs. But the Waymo obviously is heavily programmed not to do that. So it's rather like, people will eventually exploit the weak spots. There's a famous one, which is, there are people in residential streets who don't like cars going down them. So they will report them as closed off on Waze and other apps, just to discourage drivers from going down. And then there's this wonderful guy who did a hack, I think in Chicago, which was walking around with a hand-drawn trolley at about 4 miles an hour with 50 mobile phones on it, you see, which gave Google Maps the impression that there was massive traffic congestion because you had literally 50 people with phones traveling at a really low speed. So Google Maps infers from that, okay, this road is unbelievably slow. Okay. And so this guy was literally going around and screwing up the algorithm with his 50 mobile phones in a little trolley. And it always occurs to me that, we tend to optimize for a perfect world because that's what engineers tend to do. They tend to have an optimizing mentality. And actually, what we're not very good at is spotting the weak spots. But it only takes 1 out of 6 billion people to find a weak spot.
So, Ben, Waymo, you going to do it?
Oh, do it, yeah.
What, getting one?
Yeah, no, it's fantastic.
I'll give it a go, but I don't know. I just think it's weird. It's odd, isn't it? I mean, I'm sure I'll get on board eventually, but not on English lanes. Imagine being on English lanes, single track lanes.
They'd be okay, I think. But you're right. That is an interesting issue, which is obviously, the software corrects for left-hand drive, not right-hand drive. But there are probably nuances in British driving, particularly roundabouts, which Americans don't know much about, which will probably take time to it'll take time to adapt to. I mean, there are probably social conventions. I heard the sweetest thing, by the way, last night at a dinner, which is this is just a driving convention. The driving convention that you flash your hazard lights to say thank you originated in Japan because it's a hyper polite culture. This is even sweeter still. Okay. The people who arrive first at work in Japan in the company car park park further away from the door, okay? Because they figure that people arriving later might be in more of a hurry, so need to park closer to the door. So people will arrive really early at their Japanese place of work and deliberately park 100 yards away from the door to leave space for people arriving after them. That is the sweetest thing I've ever heard. I think it's absolutely delightful.
It's amazing. I need to go to Tokyo. But so we've got one of my upcoming favorite episodes because I was really looking forward to getting Ben down here. So obviously, Ben, we know each other. And obviously, you know Rory. But I wanted to make sure that we brought you in and we saw a side of you that probably not a lot of people get to see from an interview perspective. How I know you is as somebody that's an inventor, creative, a rational doer, and very, very self-aware, right? But I think that a lot of the times, and we will talk about the Gymshark story, people get too caught up in just the story element of it. And I want to make sure that they see the operational side of the now CEO of the brand. Well, it's been 3 years now. But before we get into all of that, for those that have been living under a rock and don't know the Gymshark story, it'd be great for you to tell a little bit about the origin, how the brand started and where we're at today.
Yeah, so started the brand in 2012, and it was funny really because I never really thought it would be a big business. So before Gymshark, I started lots of different things, and they're all very small, so iPhone apps, websites, things like that. And having done lots of different types of businesses, the ambition for Gymshark, which is going to sound really boring, was just to sell one thing online. That was it. So the original ambition was, because I'd never made a website that had transacted, it would always be in either an app or it was something that would run ads. So the initial goal was, let's make a website that would sell something. And it was really, actually, it was perfect timing, right? Because found out that Shopify existed, and that just made making that e-commerce website infinitely easier than it ever would have been. And made the website and was like, right, now we need some product. And then very quickly realised that that's actually really hard to do. And I knew directionally that we really wanted to be in fitness and bodybuilding because that was the thing that we really loved growing up. And I remember really vividly, actually, I remember thinking, right, supplements is the obvious thing for us. We all take protein, creatine, things like that. Let's sell supplements.
And it's a big online marketplace already.
It was huge. And I actually called a friend of mine at the time, a guy called Dan, and he worked at a company called USM, which was office was in Longbridge in sort of the southern edge of Birmingham. And I said to him, right, we need some product. I need some product to put on this website just because I want to sell things online. He said, fine, I'll do you a deal. He went away and he came back and he right, Ben, I can get you a deal. I can get you a load of supplements, but the minimum order is £8,000. Right. Now, I'd never heard of £8,000, let alone seen £8,000. I was doing like Pizza Hut delivery driving at the time. So at that point I said, listen, I love you, but we cannot afford that level of investment and that level of risk. So then came up with the idea of just drop shipping, because if you remember, the goal wasn't big, it was literally just to transact online. So then we went into drop shipping. So loaded up the website with probably more product than it actually has today, 12, 13 years on, and put all the supplements that you could ever imagine. And then when someone would order off Gymshark, it would basically trigger someone else to ship the order out. And we would make a very small margin. Loaded up the website with supplements, nothing happened. Literally nothing happened. And I think at that point I was like 18, and you sort of assume that when you put something online, put a website live, it's like having a shop on the high street. You sort of assume that people will just find their way there, and no one did. Kept posted on Facebook, kept doing the social media in the early days.
That was the weirdest internet phrase. If you build it, they will come.
Yeah, because you just assume, but then you forget the fact that there is no way of people finding it. And then it was actually through Facebook we started posting, and after a couple of months, finally, we had our first order, and I remember it vividly. It was a tub of USN hyperbolic mass, 5 kilos. It sold for £52. £2 of the £52 was our profit. Bearing in mind, but now at the time we had to pay for the domain and the hosting, all that sort of stuff. So it wasn't really a profit. It was just like a little bit of margin or something to go towards the domain. Now, but it didn't matter, because if you think, the goal was just to sell something online. And I remember literally dancing around my bedroom at my mum and dad's house, because it was like we'd done the thing that we wanted to do.
I need to see that footage.
And that was when, that was when it was like I guess the bug sort of started, and the passion, because it was such an exciting moment. And then kept posting online, kept selling supplements, but it became very clear that because of the margin on the supplements, we would never be able to build a business, and we'd never be able to afford to order inventory.
How does Shopify charge you, by the way? Does it charge you a percentage of sales, or does it charge you...
No, back then, so this is going back to 2012, back then I think it was free for like the first period. It was free for like the first 3 months or something. So it was obviously, they were very much in their startup phase. So yeah, and then I think they ended up starting to chart a percentage of fees on checkout or something. But yeah, basically got to the point where we realised supplements wouldn't work. I remember being at my nan's, and she had a brother sewing machine on her dining table, because she was doing like a curtain making course or something. And it sort of got all that sort of...
No, I can't believe this.
And then it was all that made us think, well, maybe we can make clothes. No one was making the clothes that we wanted to wear. The only tops that we would buy back in the day was sort of Top Man 2 for £10. So it was like, do you remember the Top Man 2 for £10?
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
Because that's all that anyone was buying. So it was like, okay.
And a night out there.
And they were fitted, weren't they? But all of the bodybuilding clothes was American. So it was big, baggy, oversized. So we sort of went...
And Top Man skinny jeans.
Yeah, exactly. We wanted American bodybuilding wear that fitted like European, British Top Man clothing, morphed the two, started making the clothes, and basically just slowly built the business from there.
And you came up with a name early on, did you, Gymshark?
Yeah, and the name...
Inspired.
It was such a boring name. So because I'd made so many websites before, I assumed that this one would fail. So for me, it was short, it was interesting, and it was cheap. It was £3.50 off GoDaddy, and it was a .co.uk domain. There was no further thought into it than that.
Good grief.
It was literally just easy. And it was funny, because I didn't buy the .com. I didn't buy the .com because it was about 20 quid. Someone else bought it, and a few years later, we ended up paying $3,000 for it. We had to empty our bank account at one point to literally pay for the .com domain because I didn't buy it.
Zoom has a similar story where there was Zoom.us, because in the early days they were too stingy to pay for Zoom.com.
We did exactly the same thing. Exactly the same thing.
So this happened with us in Butterfly Effect. So we couldn't pay for Butterfly Effects. We got Butterfly 3 Effect. Really? And then we named the company that. And I tried to get a creative spin on it, because when you put a B and a 3 together, it looks like a butterfly. So I tried to put my own brand side to it.
Nice.
But then Michael, my co-founder, was like, no we need to do it properly. And that's why we made the change there.
We ran, I can't remember what we ran on. I think it was gymshark.co.co for a few years, until we could eventually get the .com. Got the .com, and I mean,
So the first clothes you made, were they literally homemade, or were they?
Yeah, so the first ones were almost like blank T-shirts printed. So we sort of bought a sewing machine, bought a screen print, and we printed. And that was really important because you could have blanks, but you could do lots of different prints. So you could sort of wait until the order came in to then make the product. So if you think at that point, when you've got no money, you're literally, scrounging for any way to build leverage or, to not have cash tied up because you just don't have the cash. So we started off with blanks. And then what I would do with the blanks is I would then relabel them. So the back neck label we would change.
Got it.
And it's really interesting, actually. This is going to sound really bad because I did do English at school. You can tell if you own the first ever Gymshark batch of product because in the labels I spelt official wrong. So it says a Ficky or Gymshark product. So if it's a thin label, it's got the shark and it says a Ficky or Gymshark product. But we'd imported the labels, and again we couldn't afford to then swap the labels. So we were like, well, I'd rather have a dodgy custom one that most people wouldn't notice than just like a Fruit of the Loom or a Stars and Stripes or something like that.
Everyone's going to run to the old Gymshark stuff and see whether they got the limited edition.
Talking about spelling mistakes, there was an American genius who, in the time when you made reverse charges calls in the States, and they were very lucrative. AT&T did heavy advertising to promote 1-800-OPERATOR. Okay? And this guy figured 20% of Americans don't know how to spell operator.
No.
So he bought 1-800-OPERATOR, spelled ER, not OR. The last letter's irrelevant, actually, because they're only 7 digits, okay, and a 1-800 number. It's like 1-800-mattress, okay? I'll go into that later. And literally every time AT&T did $1 million, multi-million-dollar advertising campaign promoting 1-800-OPERATOR, he picked up for free 20% of the calls. Okay.
What a legend.
Oh, yeah, that's
legendary stuff, I think. But this is, presumably, I suppose, was Gold's Gym a bit of an inspiration? Because that was the one big brand in the US which captured that particular target audience,
Gold's Gym, particularly the gym in Venice. We've been there together, haven't we? Particularly the gym in Venice. That was the mecca of bodybuilding. That's where your Arnold Schwarzeneggers would go. You'd see all the old photos, black and white, of him on Muscle Beach or in the gym, and that whole thing of, and this was a funny thing, so you'd see all the lifters wearing stringers. No one sold stringers in the UK. No one. So that was a big thing for us to sell stringers, and that was one of the first products that we customized ourselves, printed stringers in the UK, which again now you can get them everywhere, but at the time it was very, very unique, and it was bringing that American bodybuilding influence into the UK.
Got it. Brilliant.
And honestly, something that's really interesting that you said was the fact that you didn't know what you were going to sell, but you knew the audience that you wanted to serve. And
the industry that we wanted to work in. And that was the really important thing. I knew that we loved the gym and lifting. Then it was just finding out where we fit into that.
Do you think that more business leaders should think about that, or anyone that's looking to find a business?
The thing that I think about if I was to start again today, or if I'm talking to anyone that's starting, I think it's really important to know, and I still think it's very much true to this day in a way, is having really low expectations makes a massive difference. Because if day one we'd have opened up the website with an intention to be a multi-billion-dollar brand,
you would have given up.
Or the first order would have been either expected or not as exciting, and everything would have been a drag. Whereas because the first aim was to have an online transaction. Then it was to have another one. Then it was to have regular online transactions. Then it was to make apparel. Then it was to make a profit. Then it was to make a regular profit. And then it was to do an event. And then it was to do another event. And then it was to do multiple events a year whilst also being able to sell online. The first event we did, we closed the website down when we were at the event because we weren't also at the warehouse, so we couldn't ship out orders. So it's
what's very interesting about this, of course, is that because this is called the Bottleneck Podcast, where your bottleneck is moves. Okay, according to what stage of maturity you're in. So the story from Eli Goldratt, who wrote The Goal. Now, I may be getting this wrong, so put in the comments if you know the really accurate story. But that his father, he was a physicist, and he was a really sophisticated, high-end physicist. His dad had some sort of business that made chicken cages, and he looked at the manufacturing of the chicken cages and said, you've got an artificial constraint here in how many you produce because of some part of the manufacturing process. If you replace this process with another process, you can speed up production and make 3 times as many cages, which, sure enough, they did. Then they came up up across a completely separate problem, which is not enough people kept chickens to sell all the cages they could make. So the bottleneck went from being a production bottleneck to a marketing and actually possibly a definitional bottleneck, which is maybe you need to sell people with hamsters or something, right? And so it's very interesting because what you had was a really sensible staged, because what companies tend to have is they have this strategy, which they try and implement in parallel. But actually, what you need to do if you want to grow organically is start it, to quote Chairman Mao, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. Get to stage 1, then get to stage 2, then get to stage 3.
Yeah, and it wasn't until many years later, probably, I guess, sort of when you were at the business, that we actually started to think about a genuine longer-term vision. It was genuinely, everything was the next day, the next week, the next month. I mean, the week I'm sure we'll talk about this, the week you joined, you didn't do your job for months when you joined, because we were just, again, we had to look at something completely different. And I think for me, low expectations and that, you're right, that single step sort of ambition, I think is really, really important, because I think there's so many kids nowadays that go, I want to run $1 billion business, or I want to be this, or I want to be that. And I think that ambition is really, really powerful, but it is a marathon upon marathon upon marathons to do. I've done this job every day since I was 18. And I think, and by the way, I absolutely love it. I love the job I do. But I think there are so many brands and businesses that have exploded for 6 weeks or 6 months or 6 years. There are very few that have stood the test of time for 20, 30, 50, 100 years. Our ambition is to stand the test of time, and that requires such consistency and diligence and, not veering too far off the path, always protecting your model, making sure that you're, to your point, always focused on the bottleneck that it's in front of you, not the one that might be there in 6 months' time. I think
good tip, by the way. The companies that do survive 100 years, this is a John Kay observation, are marketing-led companies. Procter & Gamble, Unilever, Nestle, companies that are really focused on the customer, not on optimizing their existing product line or manufacturing cost cutting. Those companies that are heavily customer focused tend to be they've been in the sort of Fortune 500 or the FTSE or whatever for 100 years. And actually, John Kay predicts that, companies like Google won't be that impressive in 15, 20 years' time. Fundamentally, the customer, if you're focused on the customer, you're focused on the real world. Whereas if you're focused on the shareholder, you're focused on meeting some arbitrary metrics to please it's not even the share owner you're trying to please, it's some institution that wants to justify its own existence to the, the ultimate share owner.
And I was going to say that, going back to the whole thing about being customer-centric, the amount of people that come to me that say, I want to build a unicorn, or I want to be a speaker. And then I ask them, so what do you want to speak about? Or I ask them, who do you want to serve, like as an organization? And you can already tell the trajectory of somebody's almost like potential success based on how they answer that question. So if you think about the output of what you're going to do and not the input, and there's not a forever plan, right? Which is why, even though when we talk about this whole concept of building in chapters, which is what I like to call, right? You build in chapters as opposed to just like going to the end of the story. What about the role of business plans? Has that changed? Because so many people, before they start anything, they build this business plan with this 5-year plan. Did Gymshark ever have a business plan at the start?
No, not in the early days. Now I wouldn't call it a business plan. I would call it a broad strategy and direction. And I think that's more out of necessity than anything else, just because where we are now, we've got a really considered sort of strategy where I think you're right. Like if you have a broad shareholder base, then what people will do is they'll focus on the short term. And generally in business like ours, what they'll say is, okay, make more product to serve more people, because if you've got a larger total addressable market, you must be able to make more revenue. If you can make more profit, you must be able to make more profit. That's a really real generalization.
Every few years, Apple is bullied into producing a lower cost product, and every few years it fails.
And I think that's the natural, that's the gravitational pull of a business that runs like ours. What we've said is, we want to be really narrow and we don't want to expand our product. We want to make the best gymwear in the world. And the obvious thing for us is, why don't you make football, basketball, hunting, whatever else it is? Why don't you do a bit more like fashion? Why don't you do all these things? Whereas what we've said is, no, we want to focus on building the best gymwear in the world. One, because we genuinely think we could be the best in the world at it. No one else is focused solely on that in the way that we are. No one else, I think, has the authenticity. We were founded on these principles, and I think that's really, really important.
It's also a growing market, which helps.
Also a growing market, which really, really helps. And I think, so when you linking that back to a business plan, because before it was just, we were just doing stuff, it was just, right, let's do an event, let's do this. Now, because it's more complicated, we do have to think about how we approach those things and how we manage our cash and inventory and opening shops and all that sort of stuff. But I would say it's a strategic direction, but we're always ready to pivot and adjust to what the customer wants or how the market looks at that time. It's almost like
it gives you a North Star and a red line, right? It's almost like the business plan is there to keep things simple and keep us almost committed to the mission at hand.
Alignment. It's more that feeling of, again, because most of our business is in the US, so there's always one of the team traveling. It's that thing of, if Noel's in New York, he's completely aligned with the direction in the same way that I am, as if Sean's in London or whatever, or Carly somewhere. It's making sure that everyone knows, particularly as a leadership team, then as a broader business, where are we going and why are we going there?
Incidentally, you've probably resisted over-premiumizing, haven't you? Because there must be a lot of encouragement for you to kind of Lululemonize your pricing.
It's really important to me that is one of the things that the business was founded on, going back to Top Man 2 for £10 t-shirts, was affordability for kids getting into the gym. If we walk away from that, then we're not the brand that's one of the founding principles. Like, if you think, again, £5 an hour at Pizza Hut, you can't afford to go and spend 120 quid on a t-shirt. And it's really important to me that 16-year-old kid that's just getting into the gym for the first time, probably doing a part-time job, can go and buy Gymshark, particularly at the entry level, because those are the kids that are into the lifting. Those are the younger demographic that it's important to me that we. But
also, they're probably the most authentic in terms of user imagery.
And that's when people get into the gym. It's when people form a lot of their lifelong habits, and hopefully, in the same way that we did, is just get into the gym, and then it becomes a part of your life. Which is really important to us. And I think, and again, these are things that you look back at retrospectively. This wasn't a strategy at the start. We didn't sit there and go, let's make it affordable. It's, let's make what we could afford. And then you look back and you go, oh, that was a founding principle. That's one of the reasons that people really like our brand. So let's protect that.
I think that a lot of the times when people start to professionalize and think about things like values, et cetera, they always look at what other brands' values are for inspiration. But really, your values and your pillars always existed. You just haven't taken the time to step back and look at them. It's almost
uncovering them, isn't it, in a way? And again, I still think Gymshark to me is still really a startup. It feels like a startup, and that's really important for us to protect. And I think, again, like you say, it's protecting that for as long as we can.
And what are some of the changes that you've seen in the industry today versus how it used to be back in the day?
In fitness or broader retail, e-commerce?
Both.
Well, I tell you what, when we first opened up our website, people still thought it was a bit weird to buy things online. I mean, we weren't so
What year was that?
The website was first built 2011, 2012.
Okay, So
it was early, but not so early. But to buy clothes, and then people weren't totally sure on the returns policies, like how does all that work and all that. So that was early. I mean, I remember there wasn't an integration between Shopify and Royal Mail. So I manually created an integration where it would drag a CSV out of Shopify and then automatically upload it into the Royal Mail system in order to then print the labels so that we could manually post the orders. So if you think it was early, but you could hack your way around
so
things.
So Shopify was, a couple of years old?
It must have been very, very young at that.
I think that company is a sleeping giant in a way.
I think it's incredible. I'm such a fan. I'm such a fan. And for many, many reasons, purely from a selfish perspective, it allows businesses like ours to invest our resources on what we can be the best in the world at, not on thousands of developers
replicating a load of crap that everybody else is.
Let them do what they're the best in the world at, and then they allow us to do what we're best in the world at. And that's why I really like them.
I've always wondered why they never put a front-end search engine on it. Apparently there's some ethical dilemma that they can't choose between different customers. But if you think about it, it becomes the alternative Amazon.
You could literally all Shopify, because they make up a massive proportion of American e-commerce retail.
It's insane.
Huge.
That's an interesting idea where I haven't thought about that before.
It's an amazing business.
Why can't you search for brands on Amazon?
Because actually, a lot. By the way, do you still deliver using Royal Mail?
Yes, yeah.
Very interesting thing. I'm fairly convinced that a large number of consumers prefer things delivered by Royal Mail because you have a relationship with the postman that you don't have with a standard courier. Okay. But the decision as to who delivers is usually made by procurement, not by marketing. Now, procurement are purely incentivized on cost reduction. In other words, securing the biggest possible rebate by putting everything through one provider. Okay. And of course, procurement don't get any credit for incremental sales. They only get credit for reduced costs. And I've always wondered about this because every time I speak to an e-commerce company, I go, at the very least, offer people, even if they have to pay, a choice of who delivers. Because a lot of people have an aversion to one or other courier because they've had a bad experience or whatever. And it's very interesting that because, so you actually created, now presumably Shopify does have integration with Royal Mail.
It's all completely done now. But again, so we were early, but not so early where people would order online. It was just a bit more uncomfortable than what it was now. Some of the integrations weren't there. If you were in America, you'd have to go on a completely different website and it wouldn't really function particularly well. Whereas now it's far more smooth.
And now the word community. So obviously, when I came into the marketing world now, everybody's talking about this word community. And for us, it just came like natively, right? And a lot of the times people feel like how Gymshark built his community was digitally. But I always tell them, no, Gymshark was a brand in real life. They went to the expos. They earned their right. They almost like went to the expo and earned the right to be the name that everybody remembered when they went to the expo.
That for me would be one of the biggest misconceptions of Gymshark would be we built our online community offline. And it's really interesting actually because what we would do is we would go to events and people would come to the event, they would follow us to see where we're going to be, where the stand is, what product they could get. And we did the events in Birmingham, in Cologne in Germany, Ohio, LA and Melbourne. And we would go around the world doing these events constantly. And that's where we would build the community because we would finish the event and anyone that was around, we'd say, right, we're all going to go to the local gym. Who wants to come lift with us? And people would come and lift. And again, you would build up that following. And it's really, really interesting because, and I think it's still true, I haven't looked in a while, but I remember a few years later, I then looked across all of our socials at where the hotspots were. And weirdly, all the hotspots was that Cologne, Dusseldorf area of Germany. Obviously, the UK, particularly in the Midlands, which is where we were founded. Ohio in the States, obviously the West Coast, LA, and then Melbourne, Australia. And I think it's that sort of, it's almost like that domino effect of that's where it started. It started through the events. Then people would go on Facebook at the time and then later Instagram and so on. And it just built out like that.
You also have one lucky feature, which some clothing brands don't, which is the brand is incredibly visible on the clothing and it's completely normal.
So you get that.
You effectively get that sort of effectively unspoken word of mouth, which is people see who's wearing your clothes and copy it.
Well, it's funny you say that as well, because when we did those first events, we gave away free T-shirts to everyone that would come to the stand.
I remember that
Every single person. I mean, we over-ordered them massively, but we had free T-shirts to everyone that would come to our stand. And you're right, and they would love it.
Apollo.
It was the Apollo. And it wasn't cheap. It was a really, really well-made product. It was the perfect Gymshark fit. And it had, to your point, Gymshark completely across the chest. So people are buzzing because they get a really high quality product. It costs us a lot of money. But then they go and wear that in the gym every week for the next few years. And it's literally, that's where it really helps push the brand to grow.
So one thing, just to double down on that, I think a lot of people underestimate the power of turning your audience into billboards or your biggest advocates, right? And what happened during that period, because I remember I was one of the fans that actually, that's when I found out about...
You get one?
Yeah, I got one.
You did?
I have one. I have a picture somewhere on Instagram. Maybe I archived it. So because there was a time when like... Gymshark saw the story because I remember the Hodge twins at the time were there. And then I went to go meet the Hodge twins and I see this brand called Gymshark that has like 4 people queuing up for 4 hours, right? But then everyone was walking around the whole Body Power with the Apollo t-shirt. So I did so I looked at the following before the actual event. And because everybody was wearing Gymshark and tagging over the weekend, the following went up by like 150,000 people because you turned the audience into billboards, right? So actually, just focusing on your 1% and giving them a crazy experience where they advocate and tell everybody else about you is a way better marketing approach than...
One of my mantras is the real world is a medium too. So it's very easy in advertising to get absolutely fixated on what's appearing on a screen. or on print.
Yeah.
Completely forgetting the fact that people spend a large part of their lives actually in the real world, seeing what they see, drawing inferences from it.
But you're right. But from a marketing perspective and from a brand perspective and a creative perspective, it feels really intuitive. But I remember when we really started to invest into digital advertising, and it's been really successful for us. But I remember being so amused at the race to who could create the best analytics. And obviously these digital platforms knew that if they could create the best analytics that would show the best ROI in the best detail, the individual running those ads could show their boss and they'd probably get more signed off to then go and spend more on the channel. So you're right. They were sort of taking advantage of something that you just wouldn't get in the real world.
Two things. So the first one being, that aha moment for me was when I kept asking myself, why is the price of billboards in Times Square so much? Because I remember once we did an exercise where they actually gave us a discount and we did something really great for that. But I was like, why is it so much when everybody is like online? Then it occurred to me that actually everyone takes a picture on Times Square and that lives online. So actually what you're paying for is not necessarily because people get to see it in Times Square. It's because in the hashtag of New York.
And actually you appear in films. So Piccadilly Circus charges a premium partly because there is a chance that you'll be featured on television coverage, films, etc. Because if anybody says London in the US, they have a shot of something like that. Now, there's also a very funny series of poster sites, which used to be probably less so, but the Cromwell Road was disproportionately expensive because if you were a Japanese brand, your CEO would fly to Heathrow and take a taxi into London. And the principal target audience of some of those ads on the Cromwell Road was the chief executive driving in. So the marketing director would know that he'd seen a couple of ads for that brand on his trip to the office and would think you were doing a good job. So there are all manner of kind of weird sort of subterfuge reasons why people sometimes choose the advertising media they do.
And I remember, so there was one time, and I didn't get it at the time, which is why I always say that I don't think that people understand how ahead of, and it wasn't necessarily because you were trying to be very tactical. It's just like, you're like, well, let's test it, right? You're not scared to test. And I remember there was a time when we were doing paid ads and it was doing really, really well. And you wanted to see how strong the Gymshark brand was if we turned off all the ads, right? And to see whether, so I did an email to the whole company saying, we're going to switch off all the ads. I was the one that was brave enough to say, Ben, why, right? Like, why are we doing this, right? And then one thing I realized, because Noel says a thing, Noel's the CBO at Gymshark, he says, the reason why Gymshark is big is because more people hear about Gymshark, not from Gymshark itself, right? So Gymshark's not the one that's going around telling everybody we're great. You have obviously the athlete roster, you have the fans. I think there's like nearly 20 million hashtags on Gymshark. People are advocating for the brand because of their experience. So I always say to brands right now, don't get so caught up in the almost like the drug of certainty that comes with paid of putting £1 and getting £10. You don't actually have a brand. Because what happens is when you look at your share of voice, if you had to switch those things off, or if they were to disappear overnight, what have you actually got? And I think that the gap of like revenue, day-to-day traction, once you switch that off, tells you how strong the brand is.
And then this might be too much detail, but we see our brand investment purely as a fixed cost. It is, so there's no, obviously you can fluctuate your marketing depending on like, how the business is going, whereas for us brand investment is
it's a cost of doing business, end of.
It's not something.
What happened when you turned it off, by the way?
At the time, the problem is nothing happens immediately. You've still got that flow. There was actually a reduction, but it definitely wasn't as big as what you would have expected it to be. And because you're living in at that point, and this is going back several years, you're living in the nuanced world of cookie windows and everything else where you've got double counts of revenue and Google and Facebook and everyone else is sort of like, chipping into the sale, but they all almost take equal credit for it. So, but
what was happening is, so for Gymshark, it didn't drop off so much because a lot of the people were posting about the brand. Probably people ordered that week, posted about that order. So the brand strength and the brand share of voice was very like led towards the audience. Whereas there was this period in like the pandemic when a lot of people started startups, right? So a lot of the crops of business that you see coming right now, they're so almost like reliant on paid media that actually that was the strategy from the jump, right? That now that it's becoming more and more expensive, you're seeing like that growth rate slowing down because they didn't think about the idea of investing that fixed cost into brand, right? And I always say that if you just think about it in human terms, it seems like paid media is like a salary. right? Like everybody knows that it's like consistent, they know they're going to get it, and they're almost like very scared to get out of that routine. Community is almost like your savings, right? It gets you out of jail, especially when times get hard or if a brand makes a mistake, etc., etc. But brand is almost like your pension or even a trust, right? That pays dividends all the time if you play it right and you're very intentional about it.
No, I agree. I think the other thing with this is, and for us when it comes to brand, it always comes back to the customer. And I think the really important thing for us is, to this day, I still think this is true. We've been speaking to a really underserved audience. So you've got all of the big sportswear. So Nike, to me, is one of probably the best sportswear brand of all time, right? And that was founded on the running shoe for me. And that's where, for me, if I need a running shoe, I'm going to Nike, just because I have that sort of nostalgic view of that's where their brand was built. And then they've built so much off it. Under Armour made the best layer. Under Armour built the best base layer that has ever been built. And I know their business has sort of stretched as well, but that was the best product ever. Lululemon, that was
American football, was it? Under Armour?
Yeah, American football. Yeah. Lululemon built the best ever yoga legging, and again, like I think they still build the best specifically yoga legging. Gymshark was built in the gym, and that's really, really important to us. And continuing to speak to that audience is really, really important, because that's really foundational. That's where the community comes from, which is why we can then invest in brand, which is why we can then invest in that sort of more variable paid marketing.
We always talk about the beauty of niches, right? And I always tell people that if your addressable market was only 1% of the global population, that's 80 million customers.
It's still huge, yeah.
If you can get them to spend £10, that's 800 million, right? And a lot of people don't think about that. They don't think about getting that real depth and meaning something to a direct audience. They're trying to mean something to everybody, which I think is the reason why a lot of people get caught out.
Yeah.
Well, I think Google and Meta have tried to sell this idea that targeting is something that happens in an algorithm or in a computer. The most effective form of targeting is actually in the consumer's mind, which is they recognize themselves in the ad. So actually it's an act of someone, instead of saying, this is for you, it's actually someone going, this is for me. That's how targeting really works. I identify with this. And it's probably why, by the way, your focus on one core audience. First of all, you don't have a competitor. Well, I suppose there are a few. But effectively, once you start going general, you are competing with absolutely everybody. Whereas you have that moment of complete self-recognition. In your target audience, which is, that's what I'm about. This is for me.
Well, you just get so much more leverage as well from the investment that you're making, because what we're not doing is, in round numbers, we're not spending £100 to appeal to all these people. We're spending £100 to appeal to this really, really narrow audience, and then it goes through everything. It goes through the overarching brand strategy, all the digital ads that you'd see, the product strategy. Like we narrowed our product range dramatically over the last couple of years because we just saw a product that we didn't necessarily need and wasn't serving that customer. So we said, let's make a narrower range that's higher quality, and it's served us really well.
Now, I've got to ask this, which is, along with Led Zeppelin, you're a Birmingham brand that broke the United States, that broke the United States. And how did you do that? When did you decide to do it? Because it's an extraordinary thing to do.
Honestly, it was a combination of social media and events. I think because we did the events and we grew on social media. Some of the first event we did was Birmingham. The second one was Cologne, and then we did Birmingham, Cologne, and then we did Ohio and LA. And I actually remember landing into Ohio. It was December for the Arnold Expo. I mean, I hadn't even checked the weather forecast. I literally didn't even take a jumper. I landed into Ohio, and as we're coming down, I remember looking out the window and seeing snow. And then the guy on the plane thing, it was in Fahrenheit, I can't remember what he said, but I remember he was saying it is minus
Fahrenheit.
I was like, oh my God, I couldn't believe, I'm like there finding out how cold it is. It was the coldest I'd ever been. I had no idea. I'm used to temperate, relatively cold English winters. Anyway, and we just went and we just did the events. And I think doing the events and building the social media there, because it's all English speaking anyway, you get this natural just growth over there. And then I think it's been over the last few years, it's now the majority of our business.
And I remember there was this crop of influencers from Houston. So Gymshark was big.
The first influencers. So the first influencers that we had, or the first YouTubers, there was Matt and Chris from California. They were from Sacramento. There was Alon from Germany. Jeff was from Washington State, and Lex was from Manchester. So 3 of the 5 or 6 were in All-American as well.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, so going back to that point, I seem to have this really crazy theory that, especially in the UK, the brands or the B2C brands that tend to scale the furthest are those that are not from London, because they almost come from as an outsider perspective. So what happens is a lot of people think first you break the UK and then you break the US, but a lot of these guys or gals realize that they can't get into London because they're not the cool kids of London. So they actually find more correlation with brands outside of the country. They build there and then they come back to London.
Because I also heard from a Scandinavian that they always said that the great advantage of a Scandinavian business was that you realized that the Swedish market alone would never make you rich. So you had to think outside it. Whereas in a country like Britain, Germany, France, you can make quite a lot of money just being a local brand, so you don't have to think in quite the same way.
See, you're sort of in an uncanny valley, aren't you, in the UK? It's a bit of a weird one.
You're halfway between the US, which is where you can become inordinately rich just serving your home market.
It's interesting because I found the UK, I still think to this day, Gymshark couldn't have been started in anywhere else. And when I say anywhere else, I include Birmingham, because there was a few things that had to happen. One, I mean, more people getting into the gym and fitness than ever, particularly women. That was a huge shift. Social media was was growing, and people were becoming more comfortable buying things online. That was really important. But the best expo for lifting in Europe was in Birmingham. So we then were massively inspired by that. And a lot of the big American bodybuilders would come over to Birmingham. That was really important. And then because of the UK's sort of digital penetration, being able to make an online website that can ship to 70 million people in 24 hours is really, really, really powerful in an English-speaking country. So you've got, you can ship to the US in 24 hours, particularly the East Coast. You can ship to all of Europe in 24 hours. There were competitors that were started in other parts of the world that I genuinely think were at a disadvantage because of where they were located.
That, by the way, I mean, Jeff Bezos, when he first came to the UK and discovered that next day delivery was a standard Royal Mail service, not a premium service, was totally freaked out by that.
It's huge. So I genuinely think there's something in that, a combination of the timing, the courier network, the e-commerce penetration in the UK, the expo. I think that was massive for us.
And the thing is as well, so I did some research on the founder of Red Bull, and what he did is he took the company away from the noise, right? And they created their own almost like space, right? Where nobody else can kind of like infiltrate. And I kind of think that if you think about like Blythe Valley, and if you think about like Redditch.
Which is in Solihull, by the way.
Solihull, by the way.
Okay,
shout out to 0121.
Because one of the lessons I've learned is no one from Birmingham actually lives in Birmingham. Sutton Coalfield, actually.
It's very posh up there.
So when you think about where Gymshark is, and I remember the times when we would see like the numbers go up and the numbers on Shopify and the numbers on the following, and you forget that it's real people because you don't feel it.
You're you're literally in a, and there's nothing else. Like you don't, like in London, you don't finish work and then go to the pub. You just, I mean, we was in Redditch at the time, wasn't we?
If you get to like 20 million,
to McDonald's and we'd
the Golden Arches,
and that was it.
Shout out to Pepe's. So what would happen is if you get to about 20 million, 30 million in London, everybody knows who you are because it's really sexy and everybody speaks.
We'd never go to London. Yeah, remember, like, for us to go to London, get the train to London was like a big thing, wasn't it? We'd go and do a meeting with the developer, and it was like really cool. And
I remember the first time when we had this tool called, I think it was Simply Measured or Affinio, and we went down to London because they're trying to quote like $4,000 or something for the year, and we had to go and see this person.
I want to see what it's like. They're charging this much money for this thing. I want to see it with my eyes.
And we took him to Nando's, which was hilarious.
That people from Birmingham don't leave that much. I mean, you'll meet far more Manx or whatever in London than you do people from Birmingham.
It's so good. I love it. People are so hardworking, so down to earth, so genuine, so helpful. It's so nice. Yeah.
And then, so obviously, then we'll go into like the word self-awareness, which is what I think is your genius level skill, right? And one thing that as soon as I said that I'm going to go on the journey myself, I had to kind of like break myself down and say, what would Ben do? Right? It's like, and he would say, what's the best team I can build, or what ingredients do I need to win the game? Not how do I be seen to be winning the game, right? And I think that what you did very early on is you said you recognized that steering the ship at this stage of the business was not where you need to put your focus on, and you got like other people on board. Like, was that intentional? Did you read a book? Did I just feel natural?
I didn't read a book. Not my early 20s. No. So what happened was I can't remember how old I was, but it would have been early 20s. And it was very obvious to me that I wasn't the Gymshark CEO, but what I really loved was product and brand. I loved being involved in product and brand. So a guy called Steve came in and was CEO for 5 years, something like that, I think. I can't remember. Did a really good job. And it allowed me to then go in and I ran brand for a bit, product, tech. I sort of did all the jobs in the business.
And you got Tim Cook in, as it were, to use the Apple analogy.
It was amazing because then I would travel around factories. I'd literally be making product. I'd be, working on brand stuff, partnerships, every single event I could go to. It completely freed me up. And what it did is it allowed me to simultaneously focus on my strengths in brand and product and be really close to the customer and the community. But then I could dabble in operations and finance and fail without consequence, because I could go in, I could completely break it, knowing that Steve or the other people, again, like people like Phil, would come in and tidy up after me. So the way I like it's almost like being able to do your GCSEs. You get a D, it's all right, I'll just go and do the same exam again and I'll get a C, then I'll do it again and get a B, and then I'll do it again and get an A, because I could just fail within reason, without consequence, and had a rapid, expedited sort of learning, being able to do both. Whereas I think a lot of people often have to choose. Now, I was really lucky because at that point we had the resource to employ CEO, C-suite, all that sort of stuff, and allow me to then go deeper into the business. And I think now it's really great for me doing the job I do now as CEO, because I've, not to the degree that a lot of people now are doing the business today, but I've sort of done every job. And I know enough to remember back to the days where I'd, sat in the factory and walked the line and sort of been really involved in everything and, original partnership contracts.
That's, by the way, a very interesting thing, which is we've created sort of management as this weird separate skill. And it's assumed that you can be the marketing director or the manager of something and just go from Everest double glazing to something completely different.
No, I'm such a massive advocate. I think you have to be able, you have to know what you're talking about. You have to be able to see, touch, feel it and know. I mean, we literally this week we've been doing we're doing some sort of like product work, and there was someone that we were working with who's relatively new to the business, who's really talented but hadn't really done it before. And I was like, we need to get product in the room. You need your hands on the product. You need to be out at a factory. You need to know exactly how this works, because you won't really be able to do the job unless you really know it in that level of detail. And that takes time, right? What you can't do is you can't have someone join the business and they basically do a 6-month training camp. So it's this weird thing of sort of like building the plane whilst you're flying it. But for me, that, especially again doing what I did, from making the product, making the website, and literally being in the nuts and bolts of it, it's so important for you to really understand the product, the community, the customer. I mean, coming to an event, that I always say, you don't know the Gymshark brand until you've been to an event.
The guy who founded Brompton Bicycles makes a really good observation here. He says, if you understand the business, you can learn a lot from a spreadsheet. If you don't understand the business and you look at a spreadsheet, basically it's worthless. You know some top line numbers, but you don't actually know what's leading to them or what's driving them at all.
Stick a trend line through it. It might look okay, but it doesn't. You don't know the context.
You don't know the context.
That context is so important.
You see that with venture capital. So when you think about somebody like Warren Buffett, right? I seem to think that he knows something that other people in Wall Street don't, right? He lives like in a little town, so he's away from Wall Street. So
the sage of Omaha, Nebraska.
Omaha, right. Like he does the same thing all the time. Yeah, he's in his American Solihull, boring town. He does his thing, and I think that what everybody does is looks at like growth projections, the Excel spreadsheet, and all that kind of stuff. I'm convinced that he has people that go into the business and understand the culture. Because if you understand the culture of the business and whether the numbers actually match up to the ambition, the connection, the almost like trust in leadership, et cetera, that may not necessarily tell you like, or influence what the business is going to be today, but it tells you the longevity of where this is going to go. Do people have a growth atmosphere there? Do people feel inspired by the long-term journey? Because now people can cook the numbers to make it look like a business is growing.
How they'd respond to challenge.
How they respond to challenge.
Your first day in the office.
Hey, so we're not going to talk about that. I have PTSD from that day. But going back to what you said about you don't know about Gymshark until you've seen an event. I think that what comes to that is until you see the audience in real life. And my experience, so for those that don't know, 2015, I've obviously had a lot of traffic going to the Gymshark website, and I ended up spending a lot of my time in customer service, speaking to people. But the thing that taught me was that this is a brand that people actually care about. Because although people were maybe complaining about the experience, then when I respond to them, say, I know that you guys are working really hard. I just want my stuff. You guys are doing the best that you can. I hope that you guys are all okay. And I never saw that before. And that's because I remember during that period when everybody was like drained of energy. And Steve said something like, we need to look after our legacy before our currency, right? And if you do something that is right for the consumer, they'll be with you forever. And that stuck by me to the point where I almost like played that role as the bridge between the business and the community, right? Yeah. Making sure that the business didn't get too much of its way and the community didn't get too much of its way, to ensure that we really made sure that we never lost sight of why we're here in the first place. They feel like, in terms of like, and I think that you still play that role today. Like, you are still there, meeting people, connecting with people. You're one of those people that shouldn't be accessible, but you're actually very accessible.
I think you have to be. For me, it's so you learn so much. I always tell this same story about we did our first event in Toronto, Canada, and I remember getting there, and a guy said to me, it was such an odd question. He said, "Why don't you do any camo?" And I was like, "We don't do camo product because who cares about camo products? Like, no one in England wears camo." And he went, "Yeah, but in Canada, in the US, people love camo." Yeah.
So I do camo. I've seen your website.
I literally called the product team. I was like, "Guys, can we stick some camo in? Like, this bloke's convinced it's going to be a great idea. Let's stick some camo into the next range."
Flex camo.
Yeah, and next thing it was the top selling.
And Brits do wear camo now.
And this was the thing, and that was literally a random conversation with a bloke in Toronto in -10 stood outside our warehouse for the event. Yeah. And I know that's like a really specific example, but I think it's so important to constantly be having conversations with the people that you're, again, I guess the community.
Never have I been a part of a business where what people say in the comment section makes it to the board level decision making, where if we can be winning, but if the customers are not happy, we are not happy, which is, I think, one of the things that sets Gymshark apart. And that starts from the founder and the leadership.
I think Noel's really good at that as well.
100%.
Noel is obsessed with every Gymshark Instagram page and YouTube video and everything that comes with it.
100%.
Interesting question. You've got a call centre, presumably.
As in like inbound for customer service, yeah.
Are they allowed to call out?
So we don't do calls. We only do messages and stuff.
You do messages? Yeah. Okay, so it works by text, yeah. No, that's interesting because one of the really telling things with a business is how they treat their call centre staff, whether they see it as a cost to be minimised or an opportunity for brand building and relationship building to be maximised.
That's really true.
There's a lovely story about James Dyson where he was being shown a load of call centre statistics about the Dyson call centre, which is the usual kind of average wait time, cost to handle, time to handle call. Yeah. And he goes, "I'm not interested in any of this," basically. He said, "As far as I'm concerned, if one of our customers chooses to contact us, we should treat it as an honour and respond accordingly." Yeah. And I've always said that's why my dad had 3 Dyson vacuum cleaners, even though he's quite stingy, actually. And the reason was he'd bought his first Dyson. There was some missing part or faulty part. Rings up. Fantastic experience. They send the part out for free the next day. Yeah. From then on, he wasn't really contemplating any other brand. No. And you can have those brand quakes, which I think, I'm going to spend part of my time between now and retirement creating a kind of RSPCA for call centers, because I think they're the most abused and undervalued medium. Yeah. Because the potential there to create, lifetime value and conversational value. Now, it's not measured. Now, I think a really good call center person, if they could capture the value they created, could actually earn 6 figures. Okay. Now, salespeople can earn 6 figures because they can point exactly to every penny of value they've generated. Whereas with repeat custom in a call center, or rescuing a defector, for example, the value is just as great, but they can't actually quantify it.
So one thing that's really interesting about that is that at Gymshark, a lot of the people at the early days that started off in the customer experience team ended up working in other areas of the business and brought the voice of the customer there. But I think because I went to university before I actually started working in marketing, and everybody talks about the 4 Ps and they get marketing really complicated. And then I recently spoke to Ellie from Formula E, and she basically rewired my thinking of marketing.
She's fabulous, by the way.
She's amazing.
Absolutely amazing.
She's amazing. Ellie, we're going to get you on here. But she basically
This is Ellie Norman, by the way, who's marketing. She was Manchester United marketing director and now Formula E.
Terrible choice in team, but we'll skip past that. Shout out to the Arsenal, won 4-0 last night. All right, cool. So she basically says that she only asks herself 3 questions. How do we become famous? how do we become easier to find, and how do we become hard to leave, right? And if you look at those three different buckets, right? Fame, social, storytelling, etc. Easy to find is where's the customer, and let's make sure that we're there, right? And then hard to leave is how do we make sure that when people come in, there's no leaky bucket, right? And I think that when you start to look at it in that way, you see the balance, right? You can be fame and driving all this stuff, but if people are leaking, then there's a cost to that. And that's the thing that compounds, right? And I think that a lot of the times people forget that community is a moat that prevents people from leaving. And if you treat your customers, and actually, I don't know whether you remember this, during that Black Friday week, one thing that was done was not scalable was the fact that Ben wrote letters to everybody. He actually wrote letters. He actually handwritten letters to the people that were the most affected. And actually, our head of commercials called people during that period, not because it was a business strategy, just because it was the right thing to do. And Ben actually spent a whole day doing that and actually mailed it to people.
Also, no one in the business did anything for weeks, did they? And that was the whole joke. Is Elf was hired to run social. He didn't do any social for months, and that was the whole thing. Everyone dropped tools, didn't they, to focus on the customer support.
Good grief,
and the thing is, that's the thing that compounded over time. And then when people try to figure out, okay, well, what made Gymshark different? Because I realized when I stepped out of Gymshark, and now that I'm going to have the opportunity to work with brands with bigger budgets, etc., the difference was what they prioritize and what they cared about. And that's all. And the fact that I felt that Gymshark was an optimistic brand in a very pessimistic country sometimes when it comes to business, right? Everyone's scared of risk. Just having a different mindset of let's try, or we're not scared of failure, or at the end of the day, as long as the customer's happy, this is the right decision.
The critical thing is there are basically businesses with an opportunity mindset, and there are businesses with a risk minimization or efficiency mindset. And it's very interesting because I think the shareholder value movement, I'm not sure that many publicly limited companies can build a brand anymore. Because if you look at who builds brands, it's founder-led businesses. Typically while the founder or the culture of the founder is still alive. And then they're family-owned businesses. Which also do it because they can think of different timescales and they can fail in a different way, which is what happens if a PLC fails. Is it turns into a kind of either a blame game or a kind of cover-up game or a post-ration. Whereas actually the mentality you can adopt and of course family-owned business. If you don't have shareholders, you focus on the customers or the employees, which is, by the way, almost as important, I would argue.
Something that's really interesting is, obviously, Gymshark started with creators, right? Because at the time, no one actually knew who ran Gymshark. Obviously, we lived in Birmingham, so we knew about you guys. So there was actually no face of Gymshark. And then I remember when Ben said that he was going to start doing YouTube. Right? Reluctantly. He said that he was going to do YouTube and he was going to learn. I remember you sending me the first video that you shot, which is now like the one that's blown up. And Robin helped you with the editing and you made everything happen. And I remember even when you asked me for feedback and I was like, you almost had loads of cuts because you had to keep doing the scenes. And the rest of the business didn't understand it, right? But now when you think about everyone almost thinks about starting the personal brand first.
But you're right. The only reason I did that video was because a bloke in Dublin asked me to. We did all of these events, right? And then we ended up doing so many events. The queues were so long that people would complain that they'd paid the entry price to the event to then spend all day queuing to get to the Gymshark stand. So they were like, why am I paying to stand in a line all day? Now, so then we said, right, let's go and do a world tour. So we just did a world tour. We literally decided in a week and we just picked these random cities. We picked 3 on the West Coast, 3 on the East Coast. We have world tour, 3 in the UK.
And by the way, Ben will be like, let's post about it on social and put some ads out. And we're going to be in Times Square. By the way.
That was it. That was it. Times Square,
that was
12. And then, so we did this world tour and we were in Dublin and I was chatting to a lad and he went, listen, I'm doing my dissertation on Gymshark, but I can't find any accurate story. So would you be able to do just a YouTube video to explain everything that happened? I remember thinking, oh God, that's the last thing I want to do. I don't want to talk to a camera and I just don't want to do it. But reluctantly, again, in the moment, I just said, do you know what? I will do it. Then a few weeks later, I went home, recorded this video, and then that's when, I guess, the personal brand started. I never had any intention when the business was being built to be posted online personally. And you'll even see now, if anything that goes online, I don't really post my personal life. It is literally about my Gymshark life. So yeah, it was reluctantly, but even that was a customer-led decision.
That is, By the way, I mean, there's some recent IPA data on this, on the power of influencer marketing. And I would argue, by the way, that influencer marketing is partly powerful because it's the first digital form of proper advertising, as opposed to performance marketing, which is valuable and important, but it's not advertising in the full sense of the word. Okay. There are a lot of things it doesn't do. And I think that, the genius of Meta and Alphabet is convincing marketers that the things that they sell are the most important thing in marketing, not memorability, creativity, all those other variables have been sort of shrunk to zero. But what's really interesting is that it appears that influencer marketing works pretty well. It works like TV level well. Initially, what's astonishing is the long-term effects.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, it occurs to me, of course, the material's still there. A banner ad is gone in an instant and you're probably on the next page before you realize it was something that interested you. Whereas by contrast, by the way, I've got a tip for you coming up. Whereas actually any material you produce that's there in eternity, and sometimes you get sleeper hits, don't you?
I've never thought about it like that, but yeah.
But there's a great company called Tickle, which really appeals to me, where it does banner advertising, but the call to action is not click here, buy now. It's save to wallet.
Okay.
And so if you've got an offer, you can go, well, that interests me. I'm not going to interrupt paying my parking fine to suddenly go shopping. Okay. But I wouldn't mind X% off or a free so-and-so. I might look at that later. And that means that, so everybody looks at impressions, but they're not measuring for what you might call the time scale in which you can act on the impression.
And also, just to add to that, so I think a lot of people are trying to use influencer marketing like paid media. And I think it's going to get even worse now that Meta have announced that they're going to allow people to pay, I think they're like £2.99 or £3.99 to be able to actually not see any ads, right? Okay. So what you're going to get is all these people that were obsessed with paid media that are going to say, okay, what's the best way for us to get traction online is to work with influencers. And then what you're going to do is everybody's going to start to like increase their prices, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that the one thing that Gymshark does better than anybody else, and I think that will continue to do better than anybody else because you're at the helm and you'll always make sure that you understand the quality of working with the great humans that are great representations of the brand, is that Gymshark always thought about, let's work with somebody for the long term. You became an athlete. You became a part of the business and you were part of the team. You're not an individual on your own. I think a lot of people, if the first post doesn't go viral or the first post doesn't drive this product almost like sale, they're just going to stop it and say that it doesn't work. But then also the value there is, yes, you're getting the traction, but you're also getting feedback. Right? So you're getting feedback, you're getting trust. And right now, as more people are investing in influencer marketing, people are very discerning of the authenticity of those partnerships, right? Whereas if you work with a brand like Gymshark, people believe that the partnership is very authentic because it's a long-term commitment. And we get that athlete feedback through the product process, which we've literally had since day one, going back to Skype calls with Chris Lovato and Matt Ogus getting feedback on the product. But you're right, it's not just a transactional relationship, and you're right, it tends to be longer term as well. And people fly in, they come to the office, they meet the team, they become part of it. If anything, the amount of times that everyone's like, well, how are you always camera ready? I'm like, because you'll walk into the office and this influencer with like 1 million followers will put a camera in your face, and I don't want to like say the wrong thing. I don't want to be ready for that moment. But there's one thing that you always used to say, because obviously we've been talking about Gymshark from your perspective, but now obviously when you start to go into a scale up and the brand starts to grow, you have to make sure that energy of continually learning almost like gets through to the rest of the team. And there's one thing that you said about the fact that being in a scale up or being in a rocket ship is almost like inflation. You have to become 10% better every single year. You can't be at the same spot.
We always say like people in the business need to, like their individual growth needs to be at least the rate of the business, as in you need to constantly be changing and adapting and growing, because if you're not, if the business is growing quicker than you as an individual, by definition, you're going to be left behind.
You're left behind. Interesting.
So that's really important to us. And again, that's one of the things I really try and hold myself accountable to, is constantly trying to learn as much as possible.
You interestingly said that the first few months you worked there, you didn't do anything roughly even corresponding to your job description. No. I mean, it's a very interesting question, which is, at the moment, it's considered absolutely standard that you hire for a role. But there's an interesting book called Counterintelligence, actually, written by a guy who headed up GCHQ, which is all partly about the culture and the hiring practices they had going back to like Bletchley Park and British intelligence and code breaking. They didn't do that at all. They hired talent and then they found a role for them subsequently. And it occurs to me that the very business of, there's an American football phrase, which is Vince Lombardi, which is hire the best athletes. So Vince Lombardi didn't go out looking, I'm going to get the terminology wrong, what is it, a tight end or a quarterback? Am I getting that right? Right, okay. There is something called a tight end, believe it or not, I think. Okay. And he wouldn't go out looking for a specific person. He'd just hire the best people and then effectively take it from there. And actually, I think there's an artificial bottleneck we've created in recruitment, where by defining what we want in advance, we're massively limiting the talent pool from which we can draw.
So one thing that I'm starting to do right now is in testing like phase. We're now being very visual and very almost like honest about what our long-term goal is, right? So we tell people, this is what we're looking to achieve. This is the value we're looking to add. How can you help us get there faster? And what role do you think that you can play? So you're almost like coming to us with, this is how I can support. This is what good looks like. Give me the opportunity to make that happen, right? And because what happens is you almost put yourself the pressure of expecting to be the expert of how to solve the problem by telling people what you want them to do. But really, if you say, we've got a people problem, want to get people to do this, how can you help us with solving that problem? Then actually, you almost like manage the person because they kind of like created the direction for them. But then obviously, you have to make sure that the brilliant basics are where they need to be. And you have to be very good at describing the problem. But effectively, if you do get to that stage, people can actually like come in with a sense of ownership of a problem that they can solve for the business forever, not just during that period of time, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, no, I agree. If you set the direction, then let people try and work out how you get there.
I think that's absolutely spot on. Rather than micromanaging every. And the other thing that always happens with very large organizations is they create silos, and then silos have their own narrow metrics. So you end up with people pursuing something which is perfectly rational within the narrow part of their business remit, but is actually not helpful to the organization as well. I mean, there are literally cases. I mean, procurement, there's a famous case I heard where the person was told, go out and negotiate them down, the suppliers down by 3% every year. And he comes back and goes, oh, great day today. I negotiated them down by 9%. And the boss goes, you total idiot. He goes, well, what's wrong with that? He said, what are we going to do next year? And so the person was deliberately maintaining their own employability by just gradually kind of salami slicing the suppliers. And it was completely wrong-headed behavior, but within their own narrow sphere, that's perfectly economically rational.
So a good friend of mine, Timo, who was on the podcast, and you've met him before, right? Whenever people ask him, what did he wish he did when he was younger, or what advice he has for younger people that want to start their own business, he says he wished he had worked for somebody, right? Because there's so many mistakes that he learned first time being a founder of a business. Now, you did that, but you worked for yourself, effectively. You went into the business and you kind of like worked in the different roles before you ended up like, what's your thoughts on that?
I think, well, there's two things. So the first thing, I did have the first job I ever did, which you'll know this. So the first job I ever did, which was actually started at work experience, was with my granddad, and we would line furnaces in the Midlands, which was wonderful for many, many different reasons. But the top two was, one, teaches you a work ethic. When you're working in a factory, you work. And the second one was, he was a one-man band. He would go, he still does it to this day. He actually sent me a picture the other week of a furnace we lined 15 years ago, whatever it was. But when we were there, he would tell me about how he started his business, and he risked everything, right? Like he risked the house, everything on his business. So then for me, fast forward into starting to Gymshark, I was risking whatever cash I'd earned from Pizza Hut. The risk was zero. So I felt a complete freedom, which I still, being honest to this day, sort of feel, to take a large amount of risk and speculation in building our business, because I always think I'm not risking the house like he had to with my mom, her sister, my nanny, and that sort of thing. So that, even though it's not direct operational lesson. It's a more of a philosophical lesson, and there's many more I learned from him, by the way, through that first ever period of work. But you're right. Then when it came to Gymshark, being able to go into each function and know how supply chain works, how product design and development works, how branding works, sponsorship, events, everything, rather than just being a helicopter. That was, I think, was really powerful.
You heard my theory, which is that if you grow up, if your parents run a shop or a cafe or a restaurant, it's like a free MBA.
Oh yeah,
yeah. Because also you get to see the whole business in the round. And, then someone who goes to Harvard Business School is taught there's a marketing course, there's an accounting course,
I remember
and actually they're all interconnected in reality.
Where were we? We were on a trip in, I'm going to say Vietnam, and we had like a minibus going to the factory. And I remember I had to load up my laptop because I had to run payroll. I remember I was running payroll, and Lois leant over and was like, "What are you doing?" I was like, "I'm running payroll." And she went, "What? Someone does that?" I was like, wait, it doesn't just happen by magic. Do you know what I mean? And you're right, because like what people forget is there's so many things that happen, like all these things happen in the business constantly. And I think you're right, when you just come into a business, you just assume that it just happened. And we actually have people that come from far bigger businesses than ours into our business, and they're used to a complete other level of infrastructure that we do not provide. Yeah. And we've had people that they're looking left and right and they're going, "Where's my person to do X? Where's my person to do Y?" And we're like, "Well, that's you. You have to do it." And it's so yeah, I think for me, working in the business was really powerful because I could hone my craft and really understand our business in a way that I wouldn't have been able to otherwise. Because when you are the CEO or when you are running the business, there's so many other things that just come up on an average day. I think that's why so many CEOs work so many hours, because I think half the time it's just things that you get dragged into. And there's this thing where,
well, you're the only person who can resolve a conflict between
exactly.
And there's an interesting philosophical question there, which is, do we need to look at how businesses are structured so there are other people who can effectively adjudicate when there's a disagreement between marketing and procurement?
That, I will pay you a lot of money because you can outsource that part of the job.
Because it is a ridiculous crunch point, isn't it?
Yeah, you're right. All the problems will always come up because you're right. Problems happen and people try and solve them, but all the worst, biggest problems tend to come in.
The buck stops here. Yeah.
Elon always talks about the fact that when you're a CEO or founder of an organization, you just deal with all the shit that other people can't solve, right? So you're basically there in service of all the shit, basically. And because you're the only person that can actually solve that problem, and often they're not the new things that other people have in.
I mean, this is an interesting bottleneck question, isn't it? Which is the conventional sort of military structure of business hierarchy. Ridiculously constant. In other words, the only person with the power to effectively decide in a trade-off between two business functions is one person. Which is, and there are probably really important trade-offs which people don't take to the CEO out of sheer embarrassment. Okay. And there are people who, as I said, are engaged in behaviors they know are absurd, but again, they're bonused on a bad proxy metric or something of that kind.
Yeah.
And again, the only person who could change that, because it's probably enshrined in your bonus structure, is again one person.
Yeah.
And actually, this is quite interesting because I think if we looked at it from a cybernetic point of view in terms of information flows, we'd say this is massively flawed.
And inefficient, because what you'd want is you'd want that top point being someone that can connect the dots and see the opportunities rather than try and, I guess, navigate the issues. Yeah.
And so one of the final questions here is that one of the key core, almost like values at Gymshark at the time when we first set up what our values are going to be, right? I think I remember Noel put a couple of us in the room and we actually tried to figure out, like, what is Gymshark, right? And one of the key ones was all about thinking like 19-year-old Ben, right? And I think the idea behind that is that the person that's going to take us out of business is not the people that we know today. It's going to be a 19-year-old in the mom's garage that spot the holes that we have, right? That will figure out the areas that we're missing and they will come and challenge us from that perspective. So you're better off taking yourself out of business and letting somebody else do that for you is basically what Gary Vee talks about. Now, when you think about 19-year-old Ben,
repeat that? What's he talking about?
You're better off taking yourself out of business than somebody else by you out innovating.
Got it. Yourself. Got it. And it's the sort of innovator's dilemma thing, which is you eat your own children to an extent. Yeah.
Crazy. But going back to the question, what is it about 19-year-old Ben in terms of like ideology, characteristics, behaviors that you think that it's vital to keep? But then what are the things that you had to unlearn to become who you are today?
Well, keep would be close to the customer, close to the product, proactive risk taking, willing to think outside the box, the typical sort of entrepreneurial things. The things that you then have to try and walk away from is you need to work out how you can, in an entrepreneurial way, build leverage in a business. Like now, we could never simultaneously, like we've got a shop in the Dubai Mall now, we've got like one in New York, one in London, we've got the e-commerce business, we've got all these other things going on. There's loads of things that we're trying to do. We're building all this different product. Obviously, at a startup level.
And the London shop, if I'm right, is only partly a shop. In the sense that it's as much a space.
Yeah, it's a flexible gym space. It was so funny because when we first, and I was pushing the envelope a little bit. When we signed the lease, I said to Noel and Mitch, who was sort of designing it, I said, right, you're now building a gym that sells a bit of stuff. Whereas obviously we sort of like mixed it. So I thought it almost like in a negotiation, if I over-index, then we can always backtrack and bring in more product. But,
nice way, yeah.
But you're right, you walk in and you'll see there's a running track, you'll see the floor's soft. When you actually look at the product that hangs there, you look up to the ceiling, there's a button where you can press that button and all the product raises up into the ceiling. We run classes there. There is a class at the back. There's changing rooms. Everything's all there. So it is a completely flexible space. And for us, it's more a cathedral for the brand.
Lovely.
Because interestingly, when we opened it, and it's been very successful since we opened it, but all the surrounding London postcodes increased in e-commerce revenue. And I guess if you add up all that probably adds up to more than the increase in the store's revenue. So the sort of halo effect of that store has been really beneficial for us.
Do you work with Herdify to do that? I was just wondering, there's a company called Herdify, which massively concentrates on what you might call geographical hotspots. And it's mostly used to inform sort of media investment. But they argue effectively that there are these huge network effects, and you effectively look at the postcodes and you notice effectively the effect.
An uplift in website sessions and revenue since the opening of that store.
Yeah, that's proper measurement. That's good. Yeah. Excellent. We like this.
So it's basically a community center disguised as a store.
Yeah.
And we were talking about the fact that actually, with where the world is right now, and obviously the fact that we all live online, brands now play a different role where they're actually, and brands like Gymshark are taking it upon themselves to actually bring people together because nobody else is doing that.
Yeah.
And you talk about it like it's just like a matter of fact. And obviously, I know that you're not looking at all these different like articles saying, we need to do more community.
Yep.
Why did you feel that was a priority and why that was important?
I think it was just instinctive. So joining the gym at 16, I learned everything from YouTube. So, and again, it's interesting because you'll know, and I do see them occasionally, and people will say, "Oh, Gymshark strategy is this," and I look at it and I think you're giving us far too much credit. Like this wasn't. The
University of YouTube shits on the Ivy League, doesn't it? It's absolutely incredible.
We learn everything from YouTube, and I think, but going back to that strategy point, it's just there's so many things that I think one of the consequences or the benefits of being close to the consumer and close to the product is you will notice opportunities that ordinarily you might need consultants and loads of people around a table to maybe figure out and spend a load of money. But it's just intuitive and it just comes to you. And then if you feed that into an entrepreneurial founder-led business, then you're probably more likely to benefit from it.
Got it.
And I think you're right about the public business brand building. Structurally, there are so many, I guess, speed bumps for a business like that to get over, from finding the idea, funding the idea, informing the market, and so on and so on. Whereas as a business like ours, we don't have to. And I think, going back to your founder question or your 19-year-old Ben question, protecting that sort of intuition in a business, I think is vital.
Ben, you've been incredible.
Absolutely sensational.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, lads. That was fun.
Thank you.